Besides, you want to know, do you not, how this woman who reads Balzac should be waiting upon you in a little general store in Winnebago, Wisconsin? In the first place, Ferdinand Brandeis had been a dreamer and a potential poet, which is bad equipment for success in the business of general merchandise. 4 times since her marriage, Molly Brandeis has packed her household goods, bade her friends good-bye, and with her 2 children, Fanny and Theodore, had followed her husband to pastures new. A heartbreaking business that, but broadening. She knew nothing of the art of buying and selling at the time of her marriage, but as the years went by she learned unconsciously the things one should not do in business, from watching Ferdinand Brandeis do them all. She even suggested this change and that, but to no avail. Ferdinand Brandeis was a gentle and lovable man at home, a testy, quick-tempered one in business. That was because he had been miscast from the first, and yet had played one part too long, even though unsuccessfully, ever to learn another. He did not make friends with the genial traveling salesman who breezed in, slapped him on the back, offered him a cigar, inquired after his health, opened their sample cases, and flirted with the girl clerks, all in a breath. He was a man who talked little, listened little, learned little. He had never got the trick of turning his money over quickly, that trick so necessary to the success of the small town business. So it was that, in the year preceding Ferdinand Brandeis's death, there came often to the store a certain grim visitor. Herman Walthers, cashier of the First National Bank of Winnebago, was a kindly enough, shrewd, small-town banker. But to Ferdinand Brandeis and his wife his visits, growing more and more frequent, typified all that was frightful, presaged misery and despair. He would drop in on a bright summer morning, perhaps, with a cheerful greeting. He would stand for a moment at the front of the store, balancing airily from toe to heel, and glancing about from shelf to bin and back again in a large, speculative way. Then he would begin to walk slowly and ruminatively about, his shrewd little German eyes appraising the stock. He would hum a little absent-minded tune as he walked, up one aisle and down the next. There were only 2. Picking up a piece of china there, turning it over to look at its stamp, holding it up to the light, tapping it a bit with his knuckles, and putting it down carefully before going musically on down the aisle to the water sets, the lamps, the stockings, the hardware, the toys. And so, his hands behind his back, still humming, out the swinging screen door and into the sunshine of Elm Street, leaving gloom and fear behind him. 1 year after Molly Brandeis took hold, Herman Walthers' visits ceased, and in 2 years he used to rise to greet her from his little cubbyhole when she came into the bank. Which brings us to the plush photograph album. The plush photograph album is a concrete example of what makes business failure and success. More than that, its brief history presents a complete characterization of Ferdinand and Molly Brandeis. 10 years before, Ferdinand Brandeis had bought a large bill of Christmas fancy goods, celluloid toilette sets, leather collar boxes, velvet glove cases. Among the lot was a photograph album in the shape of a huge acorn done in lightning-struck plush. It was a hideous thing, and expensive. It stood on a brass stand, and its leaves were edged in gilt, and its color was a nauseous green and blue, and it was altogether the sort of thing to grace the chill and funereal best room in a Wisconsin farmhouse. Ferdinand Brandeis marked it at $6, and stood it up for the Christmas trade. That had been 10 years before. It was too expensive, or too pretentious, or perhaps even too horrible for the bucolic purse. At any rate, it had been taken out, brushed, dusted, and placed on its stand every holiday season for 10 years. On the day after Christmas, it was always there, its lightning-struck plush face staring wildly out upon the ravaged fancy goods counter. It would be packed in its box again and consigned to its long summer sleep. It had seen 3 towns and many changes. The $4 that Ferdinand Brandeis had invested in it remained unturned. One snowy day in November, Ferdinand Brandeis died a fortnight later, Mrs. Brandeis, entering the store, saw 2 women standing at the fancy goods counter, laughing in a stifled sort of way. One of them was bowing elaborately to a person unseen. Mrs. Brandeis was puzzled. She watched them for a moment, interested. One of the women was known to her. She came up to them and put her question bluntly, though her quick wits had already given her a suspicion of the truth. "What are you bowing to?" The one who had done the bowing blushed a little, but giggled too, as she said, "I'm greeting my old friend, the plush album. I've seen it here every Christmas for 5 years." Ferdinand Brandeis died suddenly a little more than a week later. It was a terrible period, and one that might have prostrated a less resolute and balanced woman. There were long-standing debts, not to speak of the entire stock of holiday goods to be paid for. The day after the funeral, Winnebago got a shock. The Brandeis house was besieged by condoling callers. Every member of the little Jewish congregation of Winnebago came, of course, as they had come before the funeral. Those who had not brought cakes and salads and meats and pies brought them now, as was the invariable custom in time of mourning. Others of the townspeople called too, men and women who had known and respected Ferdinand Brandeis. And the shock they got was this: Mrs. Brandeis was out. Anyone could have told you that she should have been sitting at home in a darkened room, wearing a black gown, clasping Fanny and Theodore to her, and holding a black bordered handkerchief at intervals to her reddened eyes. And that is what she really wanted to do, for she had loved her husband, and she respected the conventions. What she did was to put on a white shirtwaist and a black skirt at 7 o'clock the morning after the funeral. The store had been closed the day before. She entered it at 7:45, as Aloysius was sweeping out with wet sawdust and a languid broom. The extra force of holiday clerks straggled in, uncertainly, at 8 or after,